And it was one of those things where you're just like, great, we just, my entire city is like helping to fund, a pathway, through pollution into poverty and thus, into prison. And it just made me think more about how much more work we needed to do, as a society. But it didn't depress me. And actually, the recession was good for one thing, which was that, they actually had to, at least temporarily halt the plans to build this jail, while we scramble and figure out like ways to make them come to their senses again. But all of this to say is that so much of the work that I did in the South Bronx really helped me understand that the work we pioneered there actually had relevance outside of our community. And when I left SSB, Sustainable South Bronx, back in 2008, it was to start my own green economic development consulting firm. And our goal was to help unlock the potential of places, because every place has them, even if you don't believe that it's there. You just have to look for it and look for it with the kind of eye, and in particular around the green economy, that helps different sectors of your population understand that there's different ways we can make beautiful things out of what does not appear to be useful, whether it's your government and the business leaders and community groups, foundations, you name it, getting folks all together to see how the green economy is going to support all their respective goals is our goal and our agenda. And so some of the places that we're working in right now, northeastern North Carolina is an area of the country that's going to be most impacted by sea level rise only after the Mississippi Delta and the Florida Everglades. And it's an incredibly rural, incredibly poor part of our country, but because of the sea level rise issues, it literally pieces of the Atlantic seaboard are being shorn off after like every 100-year storm, which is happening like every 3 years or so now. So we're working with them to help them become leaders in developing climate adaptation strategies. So how do you, help communities withstand the impacts of climate change by actually restructuring buildings in ways that'll help them deal with that? How do they, help assess the land so that they're actually managing stormwater and not letting stormwater manage it? It's developing the workforce to deal with that as well. In inner city Detroit, actually this is the pilot city for one of this. I'm so excited about this project we're working on. It's called American City Farms, and it's a national brand of urban-grown produce that we're launching. And the idea is that, right now, big agriculture concerns basically manage pretty much everything that we eat right now. And it is not that easy, for you to find, local, affordable, grown produce anywhere. The idea is to create real opportunities for local agriculture in every city around this country, so that you'll have these franchisable models, essentially, that will allow folks, to buy into these basically employee-owned aquaponic greenhouses where you grow lots of different kinds, of food, high yield, and we'll set up distribution channels so that you can buy local, affordable produce, in pretty much every city around the country. And we picked Detroit as a pilot city because, frankly, the land was very, very, inexpensive when it came down to it, and it's taken on this like really interesting piece in American history right now. I mean, I hope you can see this, but the areas in Detroit, that have been sort of downsized, they're called urban prairies because there's this grid system there, but they took down all the buildings in many cases. It's a huge city, 140 square miles, 50 square miles of it are blighted, or more like this. But there's this really amazing thing that's going on there where folks have actually started reclaiming pieces of the land to grow their own food because the last grocery store chain there moved out 2 years ago. So food access is a huge issue there. But again, I was like totally moved by like finding out about how people were really literally digging in and doing it on their own. And so the idea of creating these like large scale, but they're not huge, only on a couple of few acres. I was really inspired like by the Cleveland's example of Evergreen, who's doing at least another large scale urban agriculture project in greenhouses as well. But the idea that there's this opportunity to do local agriculture and that lots of folks are doing it, I am so excited that this is happening. It's happening all over the country in this really, really powerful way. But the idea is to be able to grow this kind of food, in ways so that it's easily accessible for people to actually really take care, of their health needs. Oh, and lastly, we're working in where's this place? New Orleans. And who's this guy? Brad Pitt. Thank you. It's like, anyway, this group actually invited us down there to help them work on a conceptual green job program for some of the work they're doing down there. But this is the reason why we stayed. This is Mr. Taylor. He is standing like right off the lower Ninth Ward. Behind him is the Bienvenue Bayou. And it was the site of this amazingly beautiful wetland area. And he was telling us the story about how when he was a kid, these wetlands, these beautiful cypress forests were actually this place of safety and sustenance, for the people, especially in the low-lying areas like the lower Ninth Ward, providing people, room and opportunity to grow. And it was places where folks fished, and actually they knew that it was a really important strategically place for them, in particular because wetlands for our nation are a national security issue. The fact that, over the past, since Hurricane Katrina was not the worst hurricane that area has ever had. It's not. What Hurricane Betsy, 40 years before it, was much worse. The difference between that and why the damage was so severe is because over that 40 years, mostly the American government destroyed most of the wetlands there to make room for the Mississippi Gulf Outlet Channel that was used to take barge traffic, almost all oil transport, to get it up the river. So all those beautiful wetlands that are freshwater were inundated by salt water. Wetlands are actually the natural sponges of our country. They actually protect against all those storm surges. And as we know, the sea level starts to rise. The fact that we don't have so much of these is going to seriously impact the security of that region, seriously, in terms of insurance rate, in terms of lives lost, in terms of all that stuff. And this is what people are dealing with right now. And it happens, we are losing at this point 2 football fields a day of wetland area in this country. And we're hoping that as we worked with them to develop a real large-scale green jobs training program that allows folks to restore those wetlands, that Mr. Taylor will actually have an opportunity to see before he moves on to the next world, like that part of his area actually becomes something beautiful. And, I know that it's sort of hard to think, for some folks to think about, why, considering all the problems in this world, are you asking people to think, about the environment if you don't care about yourself? And that is a perfectly valid question to ask of anybody. And for us, one of the things that we decided to do was think about how do we help people care, about just their places where they are, just before we even grow, before we even build all the greenhouses, before we build all the parks, how do we make sure that we're telling folks that they do matter? And in my community, one of the things that hit me the most was learning that things like, in particular for young women, young Black and Latino women in my community, teenage pregnancy rates were going up. They were sooner the victims of domestic violence before anybody else was in the city. They were also dropping out of high school at a ridiculously alarming rate. And I was just like, you know what? It is going to be really hard for these young women to care about the environment if they don't care about themselves or don't see themselves as valuable. And so thinking about, like, well, how can we, do that and help people think about it that way? So I got some help from a couple of my friends. Girls in the Bronx, we call ourselves uptown girls, because that's just a cute way of describing, us cute girls. But anyway, I don't know if you know a couple of these young women. On my left in this picture, that's Joy Bryant, who's a wonderful actress, and also Kerry Washington, who really should have been nominated for Academy Awards. And but anyway, they're both from the Bronx. Like, we grew up within a mile of each other. When they also found out about just the kind of stuff that young women in our borough were going through, they joined with me and created this thing called Uptown Girl Power. That our goal was to raise money to inspire positive images of young women in our community and inspire them to think about, just how special and fabulous they are. And so we honored a whole bunch of women in our community, everyone from college presidents, to worked with Congress people, to different rap artists and musicians and great artists, to a young woman who actually just graduated from a substance abuse program and who had been working the streets and who just realized that she deserved better for herself. And so to see that kind of power assembled to support all these women, it was one of the most amazing nights of my life. And the goal was to create, again, these kind of huge murals that allow people to see that. So remember this building. This is 2 blocks from my house. So I grew up watching a lot of that. This is what we did with it. And so to watch people have conversations, in front about what it means and why it's important to respect women, and to think and to know that there's these beautiful images that allow folks to do it. And this saying has often been attributed to me, but it's actually not. It's, you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one.